Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about MKultra's Operation Midnight Climax. And yeah, you heard that right, Operation Midnight Climax. So if you have any little children in the room with little ears, maybe this isn't the time to watch this video. Or if you're easily triggered by sexual discussions, maybe this one isn't the MKultra video for you. So I just wanted to give you that trigger warning so you can make the decision that you need to make. So if you're sticking around, you're gonna listen, you're gonna hear about Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax was perhaps the least supervised, the least controlled of any of the sub-projects of MKultra. In fact, it was even given less concern than the Frank Olson experiment, if that gives you any kind of concept on these sub-projects. Safe houses, or drug houses, they were operated in Manhattan's Greenwich Village and San Francisco's Telegraph Hill. Here's what happened. $100 prostitutes, generally $100 was their range. So that's high end for back in the 50s. They solicited unwitting people, some of them targeted individuals, to come inside these decorated safe houses, and they were then administering them drugs. Yeah, isn't that crazy? The San Francisco pad was made up to look like a bordello. Oh God. 6 MKultra sub-projects were related to these safe houses and their operations. I'm going to give you the numbers of the sub-projects in case you ever wanted to do your own research. It's sub-projects 3, 14, 16, 42, and 149. So think 149. There was at least 149 sub-projects in MKultra, all right? And that's not one person per sub-project. That's one entire operation per sub-project. Isn't that crazy? The experiments here in Operation Midnight Climax were to assess the use of sexual entrapment, sexual blackmail, in covert operations. And this was a joint operation between the CIA and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. What was I saying in a couple videos ago about them different agencies holding hands? It wasn't just the CIA, it was also the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Between 1956 and 1958, a CIA spy called George Hunter White, he had many aliases. One was Morgan Hall. He employed these drug-addicted prostitutes to entertain these Johns and to slip them drugs like LSD. Morgan Hall, aka George White, pretended to be a seaman, you know, like out on the Navy seaman. Sorry, like the jokes, they just come. This George White watched the operation from behind a two-way mirror in the bedroom, and he filmed the sessions with these Johns. And I want to add, a good portion of these Johns weren't just Joe Schmo off the street. Many of them were targeted individuals. So here's the op. The prostitute would engage a victim, selected randomly if they weren't targeted, from a place like a bar. The victim would be invited back to the safe house where drugs were surreptitiously placed in his food or drink. I don't think there was ever a mention of a woman getting entrapped in this, so we can just say he and his on this one. You have this George White character watching all this stuff go down from behind these two-way mirrors and recording it. You got no medical pre-screenings, you got no prior consent, you got no medical personnel on hand in case somebody freaks out from the drugs that are administered surreptitiously or has an overdose, and there's no follow-up at all. Admiral Turner, that's Admiral Stansfield Turner, later testified that the CIA had, quote, no idea how many victims went in and out of the safe houses. Let that one simmer. There are people maybe still alive wandering around who a prostitute solicited them at a bar, and they went, oh, okay, whatever. Maybe they didn't even know it was a prostitute, and they were dosed by the CIA and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Yeah, imagine if they had a really bad trip and it just affected the rest of their lives. You might ask yourself, who was this George White? Who was this Morgan Hall guy? Well, let me tell you a little bit about his backstory. Some documents list him as a colonel, others as an Army captain, or an OSS officer, which means an officer pre-CIA. In May of 1953, the CIA hired this George White Morgan Hall fellow to run the safe house in New York City. This white guy, he was not new to the surreptitious doping game. He was not a newbie to dosing people unwillingly or unwittingly. He had already tested strains of marijuana, mescaline, and scopolamine. He used that as a truth serum. He tested all those on himself and on other test subjects at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And I think we need to look into St. Elizabeth's Hospital to see how this kind of shenanigans went down. Here's another example. He used a syringe to inject 0.02 grams of THC acetate liquid into cigarettes. And I got to thinking about that. It's like, well, that's interesting. So you have liquid THC, you're going to inject it into cigarettes. I'm assuming that you couldn't smell it at all whenever the cigarette smoked. So that was a way to dose a person unknowingly. And he was known for his impressive knowledge of the underworld. So on May 23rd, 1943, so think, before any of this happened, we're talking 43, White allegedly gave Augie Dallas Del Gracio 2 cigarettes laced with THCA. I think that's another side chain molecule. Okay, so Augie Dallas Del Gracio. You know what I'm talking about with that name. I'm not going to say it, you know. He relaxed after he was given this cigarette that was laced with THCA from Mr. White. And he revealed information about the mob underworld operations. So, this happened in 43. This is the guy the CIA hires for Operation Midnight Climax. What was I talking about? The ethics, like how they would consider the ethics of the different people they would hire, or lack thereof, should I say? Since the experiment with Del Gracio was so darn effective in 1943, you know, he got to be known for his knowledge of the underworld, and he was, you know, one of those people that was handpicked to be on these kind of projects. These are the kind of folks they pick for Operation Midnight Climax. Someone that's known for surreptitiously dosing a mob boss. You know, that's crazy. In 1955, White opened the San Francisco Safe House under Subproject 42. So think, the first safe house was opened in Manhattan. It proved effective. So they opened another one in San Francisco. And as he'd also been a Bureau of Narcotics employee working with OSS, that was pre-CIA, the Deputy Director, John F. Blake, sent a memo to the Director of the CIA requesting assistance in interviewing the Bureau of Narcotics to find out what really happened at the safe houses. Yeah, that was a whole mouthful, so let me break it down. All right, so what I'm going to try to explain, I'm going to try to make it easy for the lay person to understand, because it's complicated even after having read this shit for a year. Once these projects were coming to light via the exposés and the newspapers and the Senate and congressional hearings in 75 and 77, and these projects were coming to light, the interdepartmental agencies were trying to CYA, as they're also trying to figure out who was involved and what happened. So they're trying to find out themselves, and they're also at the same time trying to cover it up. So since White had been a Bureau of Narcotics employee, pre-CIA, working with the OSS, the Deputy Director sees that, John F. Blake, he sends a memo to the CIA requesting assistance in interviewing the Bureau of Narcotics, because I don't know if they knew the Bureau of Narcotics were involved in any of these sub-projects until this. Then they knew, oh gosh, you know, it wasn't just the CIA, it was also the Bureau of Narcotics. So they wanted to find out what really happened at these safe houses. And Blake, when he sent this memo to the director of the CIA, he referenced a 1943 memorandum to a General Donovan transmitting a report from George White. So they had this 1943 document with White's name on it. And it referenced the unwitting use of drugs as an aid in the interrogation of mafia figures in a safe house in New York in 1943. So they could trace that back, like I said before, all the way to 1943. And so they were all being called to account for what had happened in the past and to ensure that this stuff wouldn't happen again. Admiral Stansfield Turner testified on August 3, 1977, before the Senate Select Committee, and he said, quote, 3 people were involved in carrying out operations in safe houses in San Francisco and New York City. That means 3 agents, an unknown amount of people affected. One of these agents was white. Stansfield Turner confirmed the safe houses were jointly operated in a cooperative effort between the Bureau of Narcotics and the CIA. So he admitted that. He placed the Bureau of Narcotics as the primary authority and the CIA as the secondary authority. The Bureau had used the safe house in San Francisco for debriefing informants, while the CIA had used the safe houses for meeting sources and creating compromising situations. Also, remember that when Olson's pockets were turned inside out, what was on the little note? GW, and the address for a safe house in New York City. Is that not crazy? Because in theory, what did Olson's case have to do with George White? It's a mystery. In August of 1977, senators subpoenaed 4 of the CIA mind controllers to testify about Operation Midnight Climax. And since George White had died from liver disease in 1975, he was quite unavailable. They summoned the following folks: Dr. Gottlieb, again, we talked about him in Olson; Dr. Lashbrook, we talked about him in Olson's case; Walter P. Pasternak, and Charles Geschichter. Geschichter figures in a lot of the sub-projects that I'll be talking about later. So keep his name in mind. Pasternak went into hiding and didn't show up to the closed subcommittee hearing. Dr. Gottlieb justified the safe house experiments as, quote, an administration of materials in an operational context. So we had an operation and we had some drugs to administer and it was justified. He knew drugging someone in a safe house compared to drugging them in a hospital setting would make a difference because an individual taking LSD without knowing it is extremely stressed. The theory they proposed was that if people were made aware that they're being dosed with LSD, they may rationalize the experience and not have a breakdown. I know, seriously. No one mentioned blackmail or brownstoning. As very few documents remain for Operation Midnight Climax, we do have to rely heavily on the sworn testimony given in these subcommittees. But there were financial records. The financial documents, a lot of them survived, and the checks issued to George White were commonly marked Stormy, Midnight, or Climax, which were code words for the LSD that White used. So that's where you get your one of the elements of this operation. Though it actually has a literal meaning, it also had a figurative meaning. David Rose, a CIA psychologist from the Technical Services Division of the CIA, testified about the San Francisco safe house. He testified under oath that, quote, Mr. Pasternak and I went to California. We went there with a reasonable supply of money and proceeded for about a week simply to go around to a number of bars and drink and meet people. We were trying to establish some sort of relationship with people so that we could subsequently invite them to a party. We were testing a particular device to determine if LSD could be given in small quantities via aerosol delivery. Just spray it in the air. That's the quote. That's the quote from David Rhodes, who was a CIA psychologist from the Technical Services Division of the CIA, talking about Operation Midnight Climax. They tried to spray LSD into the air. It wasn't really that effective. Philip Goldman, he was the CIA's gadget man. You always got a gadget man. And he testified that he put together the aerosol device and the triggering mechanism to set the aerosol device off. He commonly made the devices to give to George White, such as swizzle sticks for a cocktail which had a drug coated onto it and could be inserted into a drink with no adverse taste. Supposedly, White tested it on someone in a bar. So, you've got this gadget man saying, how can we best dose these people unwittingly? And they would think, stir sticks. Let's lace the stir sticks with LSD, soak it in LSD, and then we can just very casually stir it into somebody's drink and send them into a loop. Maybe they'll talk. We'll see what the casual man does, because see, these prisoners and these psych patients that we're dosing with LSD, they know they're getting dosed. We're actually giving them the tab, and that's just not a good control group. We need a group that's getting LSD that doesn't know they're getting it, and we'll watch them then and see what they do. Can we break them? What can we do to them? So that was this sub-project. We're going to get prostitutes in there too, and see if we can get, using sex and LSD, can we get them to talk more? What can we do to these guinea pigs? Dr. Gittinger, he went to the safe houses on 4 or 5 occasions. This is what he would admit to under oath. To interview the prostitutes on the underground use of drugs and discuss with them the issues like Mickey Fins, that's chloral hydrate drops were known as Mickey Fins, and that they slipped to the john. So they were trying all kinds of things. They were trying these swizzle sticks. They were trying to spray LSD in the air. They were giving them straight up Mickey Fins, the old school Mickey Fins. Gittinger also testified that he brought the LSD to the West Coast safe house. So he admitted it. He wasn't, they weren't happily admitting this stuff. They weren't happy to admit it. They did it because they pretty much had to. David Rose testified about the aerosol delivery issue. We had a singular problem. The particular house was not air conditioned, and it was hot. And we had a problem of whether or not we could arrange to keep the windows and doors closed long enough for this type, the aerosol delivery. And the weather defeated us. So that was one reason the LSD delivery didn't work, was because they couldn't keep the doors closed enough because it was so darn hot. So Dr. Gittinger takes it upon himself to test the aerosol LSD device by spraying an enclosed bathroom while alone. So he goes into a bathroom and he sprays the LSD all around using this device made by the Gadget Man, but he didn't feel anything. So they concluded that spraying LSD under those conditions didn't work. So here they are, they're trying to spray LSD into the air and huff it up. They're using THC in cigarettes. They're doing Mickey Fins with chloral hydrate. They're just putting LSD in drinks. This is some crazy cray, right? Because what they want is in the other projects, and I'm not even sure they were aware of the other sub-projects, where you have the hospital patients that are getting the LSD, where you have the Army people getting LSD, where you have the psych patients getting LSD and all the other drugs. That in those cases where you physically give the subject a drug, they might not know what the drug is, and they might not even be witting, but they know they're getting a drug. That's not a good control. You need a control to say, this is what somebody, when they know they're going to get a drug, they behave. And this is someone who has no idea they're getting drugged, how they behave. So they needed yet another control group that wouldn't even know they're getting dosed. And these guinea pigs were good for them. And when they were called onto the carpet, David Rhodes said, quote, "We did take precautions to try and make it the smallest dose possible." So they tried to act like they were nobly microdosing these people in order to test these projects. But yeah, come on. No consent. Illegal, immoral. And it's also, I just want to note, how convenient is it that these people are just nameless, faceless people to them? They're never going to be called onto the carpet about these individual people. If these people had a mental breakdown and they never knew why they had a mental breakdown, no one can ever be accountable for it, because the records are gone. And they didn't even keep good records for these safe houses. It was just literally willy-nilly. Though the release documents named a man named Philip Goldman as the project officer for the safe houses, he claimed he was simply a money monitor. Because think, what's left in the files is pretty much the financial information. Although the documents show that he did disperse monies to Morgan Hall, that's George White, and visited the safe houses, he claimed not to remember anything about any of these operations. And Dr. Lashbrook, he even admitted to visiting the New York safe house on 2 occasions. Now, they didn't just admit these things out of the goodness of their heart. They pretty much knew that there was documentation to support that, so they pretty much had to admit it. Dr. Goldman testified that the New York safe house that was Subproject 3, by the way, was set up at the request of Dr. Bortner and also available to the Bureau of Narcotics. So he was eager to drag the Bureau of Narcotics into it. And Goldman was told to continue the safe house and to, quote, justify its use. And so he did so. So what Goldman was saying is, hey, Dr. Bortner told me to justify having this safe house, and so I did. I was only following orders. One senator asked Dr. Gottlieb, and I haven't gotten to Dr. Gottlieb in great detail, but he is in other sub-projects, and so they really were talking to him. They really wanted answers for him. And one senator asked Dr. Gottlieb if anyone from the safe houses ever required hospitalization, and he replied, I have only a hazy remembrance of that having happened once in New York City. So there's some poor soul in New York City that got unwittingly dosed and required hospitalization. Who paid for it? I mean, do you think the CIA went into their pockets and said, hey, let me pay for this, because we've dosed this dude? In 2002, a lawsuit was filed by a man who alleged he was drugged in December of 1957 by Ira Feldman, who worked under George White. In a July 2002 deposition, while Feldman denied drugging the plaintiff, he admitted to engaging in the involuntary drugging of unwitting subjects in San Francisco on behalf of the CIA. So this did not come from the Crest website. This came from a 2002 lawsuit in which he admits this under oath. He's also admitting it against his interests, so you tend to believe that when they're admitting something against their own interest. When asked for examples of what happened to people after surreptitiously giving them LSD, Feldman replied, now think, this is a 2002 lawsuit. It's probably a deposition. Feldman replied, quote, people would have become very hallucinogenic. They would see things they should not see. They had trouble walking. They had trouble eating. A lot of people threw up, and a lot of people passed out. That's in the San Francisco safe house, and he's admitting to that he did that for George White. In 1963, after President John F. Kennedy, he had vowed to splinter the CIA. See how that worked out, right? A new CIA Inspector General, John Ehrman, he urged the CIA director at that time, John McCone, to close the Operation Midnight Climax safe houses. 1963. Think. That stuff had gone on for, White had been dosing people, allegedly, through the Bureau of Narcotics in 43. That's 20 years of White's dosings. I'm sure he took some time off for vacations. And then you had these MKultra stuffs kicking up in the 50s. So a good 13 years these safe houses were in existence. Now maybe they were used as plain old safe houses and used for other stuff. Again, let's talk about Olson having that little note in his pocket when his deceased body was viewed and by the CIA agents, and they turned his pockets inside out and it had GW, George White, and the address of the safe house in New York City. Why? In 1965, the San Francisco safe house was officially closed. So let's get back to the subcommittees trying to get down to the bottom of this, because they've got these financial records for Operation Midnight Climax. They've got some little snippets of information that they're trying to chase down. They've got some testimony under oath that these CIA dosings going on. They have no idea who got dosed, how many people got dosed, what they were given, and they've only got pretty much what people have admitted to under oath. So on August 5th, 1977, then director of the CIA, who was Stansfield Turner, he appears in San Francisco, and he asks the city's forgiveness for the CIA's role in the operation of the brothel at 225C Chestnut Street. And what was I saying in the other videos about the apology tours that other people end up going on 20 years after the damage is done? So, you end up having to, you take office, you try to shut down to confirm, let's confirm that this is shut down, guys. Let's confirm with the Bureau of Narcotics it's shut down. Let's make sure it's shut down within my new agency. Hey, I'm now at the head. And let's go ahead and do the apology tour. So he goes to San Francisco and he apologizes and he calls it, quote, abhorrent what the CIA did. Abhorrent as it all was, There was no disciplinary action for anyone involved in MKUltra. No one. Nobody got disciplined for any of their shenanigans in MKUltra. So in 65, the San Francisco safe house was closed. In 66, the New York safe house was closed. But in 77, I do want to note this because you always find something that's irregular. The Manhattan apartment was strangely still under lease to the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. And you might say, yeah, so what? I don't care. But this Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology was the CIA front. It's called a cutout agency, a cutout project. That society was a CIA front or a cutout to funnel money from the MKUltra program. I mean, you're just like, oh my God, okay, so you shut the safe house. So you don't bring prostitutes there anymore. You don't bring mob bosses there anymore to get dosed with cigarettes. You don't do that anymore, but you're keeping the lease on the freaking safe house. And it's tucked nicely under the Society for Investigation of Human Ecology, and the acronym is SIHE. Yeah, so you're still keeping the lease on that, and you're using it as a cutout to funnel money from the MKUltra program. I mean, it just never ends. So, then, what do you think happens then when that's found out? I'll let you answer. Yeah, that front's name is changed to the Human Ecology Fund. Yeah, I know it never ends. It never ends with these fascinating little sub-projects. The minute one's found out, it is squashed into another name or project, and you're sworn and told that it's done, it's canceled, it's done, and then it's just named something else, and they still have a tentacle on it. So yeah, I know, it's weird, huh? Operation Midnight Climax generally consists of $100 a session prostitutes who would end up unwittingly drugging victims, either ahead of the time before you got them to the safe house or after you got them to the safe house. They were trying to dose them with Mickey Fins. They were putting LSD swizzle sticks into drinks and seeing if that would work. They were putting chloral hydrate in drinks, and then they would entertain these men, giving them sexual pleasure and talking to them, trying to get information out of them to see what kind of information you can get out of people if they're more apt to be talkative about certain subjects after getting sex with the drugs. George White and his cronies would watch from behind a glass, and I don't know if they would ever then give the prostitute tips on how to do things different. That wasn't discussed. They would tape these interactions for blackmail, and they would use these unwitting people, unmarked people, to see how best to then do the targeted individuals. In other words, they'd have practice out on the guinea pigs, the San Francisco people, men who are horny or whatever, and then see how that goes with those kind of guys. And then when they had a targeted individual, they knew how best to approach the situation. What drugs work the best, how best to entertain the client and get the information out of them, and then be rolling the whole time with the blackmail footage. So yeah, that went on. That is so unethical. That is so immoral. And only once the people who are involved, or a small section of the people who are involved that could testify, did testify, they didn't do so very willingly. They would wait until the documentation was in front of their face to admit to what they did. What the one senator said, like, I wonder what was really in the files, because if they're willing to admit to this, God knows what they really did. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed Operation Midnight Climax as much as they did. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed Operation Midnight Climax, and if you did, please push that like button and ring that subscribe bell that's there, and you'll simply be notified anytime I upload another video. And I hope you have an excellent day. Take care. Bye.